He read the message twice before responding because it wasn't meant for him. It was short, misspelled, careful in the way people are careful when they're already embarrassed. A single father, asking if anyone had an extra can of baby formula. Payday was still 4 days away. The baby was already crying. The number belonged to a man who could buy a warehouse of formula without noticing the charge. A man whose name moved markets. He could ignore it. That would cost him nothing. He could reply. That would change something he didn't yet understand. The father stood in a dim kitchen, phone in one hand, bottle in the other, measuring what little he had left. By the time the message was answered, something irreversible had already begun. If you stay for the full story, consider subscribing, not for spectacle, just to stay present for the quiet ones. The phone vibrated on the edge of the desk, just once. No alert sound, no urgency. It was the kind of vibration most people ignored without thinking. He noticed it because he'd been staring at the screen already. Not for any reason tied to work, just habit. The desk was clear except for a legal pad, a pen laid straight across the top margin, and the phone. He had learned to keep things that way. Fewer objects meant fewer decisions. The message preview was short. Hi, sorry to bother you. I think I may have the wrong number. I'm trying to see if anyone has an extra can of formula. I'm a little short until Friday. If not, I understand. Sorry again. No name. No context beyond what was necessary. The apology came twice. He opened the message and read it in full. Then he read it again, slower. There was nothing unusual about the words themselves. What caught his attention was the spacing. The way the sentences were trimmed down as if the sender had already deleted longer versions. The way the request did not assume a response. It was clearly not meant for him. That was obvious. The number was unlisted, kept private, shared only through assistants or secure forms. Whoever sent the message had typed 1 digit wrong. Or 2. He could feel the pause stretch longer than it needed to. His thumb rested against the side of the phone, not moving. The screen dimmed once. He tapped it back on. In another building, across the city, the man who sent the message stood in a kitchen that was too quiet for the hour. The refrigerator light was on, though the door was closed. It had been that way since morning. He had forgotten to shut it all the way after checking the shelves again. There were 2 cans of formula left, one unopened, one folded inward at the rim from being scraped too hard with a spoon. He turned the opened one gently, listening for the sound that would tell him how much remained. The sound was thin. He held his phone near the sink, away from the bottle warming under the tap. The baby cried from the other room. Not loudly. Just enough to keep time. He hadn't planned to text anyone. Pride wasn't something he talked about, but it lived in his hands, in the way he hesitated before reaching out. He had stared at the contact list longer than he meant to. Names blurred together. Some people he hadn't spoken to since the pregnancy. Others he'd already asked too much from. The number he typed wasn't saved. He thought it belonged to a coworker's cousin, someone who had once mentioned having leftovers from when their kids switched brands. He didn't double-check. He just typed. When he hit send, he exhaled through his nose, slow and controlled, like he was lowering something fragile onto a table. Back at the desk, the man with the phone leaned back in his chair. It made a faint sound against the floor. He didn't notice. His attention was fixed on the final line. If not, I understand. There was no pressure in it. No guilt. That made it heavier. He locked the phone and stood, walking to the window. The view was clean. Glass towers. Early traffic. Nothing that suggested urgency or lack. He stood there longer than necessary, hands in his pockets, shoulders still. Ignoring the message would take no effort. It would fade into the archive with everything else that reached him by accident. He had been advised more than once to never respond to wrong numbers. Security risks. Precedent. A paper trail. He turned back to the desk and unlocked the phone again. The reply field was empty. It stayed that way. In the kitchen across town, the baby's crying changed pitch. The man at the sink adjusted the water, testing the bottle against his wrist. He glanced at the phone once, then set it face down. Waiting was worse when watched. At the desk, a message began to form, then was erased, then rewritten shorter. There was no greeting, no explanation, just a question. Practical, direct. How much do you need, and where are you located? He stared at it before sending, long enough to feel the weight of the action settle in his chest. Not excitement, not fear, just recognition. Once sent, the message could not be taken back. It would reach someone whose life he did not know, whose circumstances he would now touch. He pressed send. The phone rested on the desk again, screen dark. The room was quiet. Nothing in it had changed. But the pause that followed was no longer empty. The reply came while the bottle was still warming. The phone buzzed against the counter, short and sharp, and the man flinched before he could stop himself. He wiped his hands on the side of his jeans before picking it up, as if the screen could feel it. For a moment, he didn't look. He lifted the bottle, shook it gently, tested the temperature again. The baby's cry had softened into a low, uneven sound. Not hunger exactly, more impatience. The kind that came when routine slipped. He picked up the phone. The message was simple. No name, no explanation, just a question. How much do you need and where are you located? He read it twice, then a third time, slower. His shoulders loosened in a way he didn't notice until they dropped. He looked around the kitchen, as if expecting someone else to be there to confirm it was real. He didn't sit down. He leaned against the counter, one hip pressed into the edge. His thumb hovered over the keyboard. He deleted his first response. It was too long. The second was shorter but still sounded like justification. The third attempt stayed. Just one can would get us through the week. I'm on the east side near Maple and 3rd. If this is a mistake, I'm sorry. Again, the apology. He didn't remove it. He said the message and set the phone down face up this time, close to the bottle. The baby's cry rose again, sharper now. He lifted the bottle, tested it once more, and carried it into the other room. The apartment was small but clean. Furniture pushed close to the walls, nothing extra. The couch had a blanket folded over one arm, always folded the same way. A playmat lay half-rolled near the window, abandoned mid-morning when the baby lost interest. He sat on the floor, back against the couch, and settled the baby into his lap. The child latched onto the bottle immediately, hands curling tight around the air. He watched the level drop, counting in his head without meaning to. When the bottle was empty, he held it upside down for a second longer than necessary just to be sure. Then he set it aside and rested his hand on the baby's chest. The rise and fall was quick but steady. His phone buzzed again. He didn't reach for it right away. He waited until the baby's eyes closed halfway, until the body softened against him. Then he leaned forward carefully, setting the child down on the mat before standing. The message was another question. Logistics, timing, no personal details. It felt like a transaction, which made it easier to answer. He replied with directions, landmarks instead of addresses. He didn't want to give more than he had to. He didn't know why. Caution came naturally. While he waited, the day continued. He washed the bottle, rinsed it twice. He wiped the counter where dried formula left a faint film. He folded the blanket again, even though it hadn't moved. He checked the diaper bag and made a list in his head of what needed replacing soon. Outside, a delivery truck idled, then pulled away. Somewhere above him, someone practiced piano, the same uneven scale they always played in the afternoons. His phone buzzed once more. I can drop it off today. No need to meet, just leave a place. He stared at the screen. The offer was straightforward, almost blunt. No suggestion of a favor. No expectation of gratitude. He typed, erased, typed again. You can leave it by the front door. Thank you. He stood there after sending it, phone still in his hand. Thank you felt insufficient, but adding more felt like reaching. The hours that followed moved slowly. He checked the door twice before noon, then again after. Each time, the hallway was empty. Beige carpet. A faint stain near the stairwell that had been there since before he moved in. He fed the baby again, using the last measured scoop. He held the can upside down longer this time, listening. The sound was almost gone. When the knock came, it was softer than expected. Not a knock, really. More a tap. Then nothing. He opened the door and saw the bag first. Brown paper. No logo. It sat just inside the frame, placed carefully to one side. He looked down the hall before bending to pick it up. No one was there. Inside the bag were 2 cans. Full, unopened. A receipt folded once and tucked between them. No note. He stood in the doorway longer than necessary, holding the bag with both hands. The weight of it pulled his arms down slightly. He felt it in his shoulders. Behind him, the baby made a small sound, not a cry, just a breathy noise waking. He closed the door with his foot and locked it, the click louder than usual. He set the bag on the counter and rested his hand on it for a moment before opening it again, just to be sure. The cans were real, solid, cold from outside. He sat down at the table and put his head in his hands. Not in relief exactly, more in recalibration. His breathing slowed. The room felt different, though nothing had moved. When he looked up, the baby was watching him from the mat, eyes wide and calm. "Okay," he said quietly. Not to anyone in particular. The words settled into the room and stayed. The message thread sat alone on the screen, untagged and unsorted. It hadn't been forwarded. No assistant had seen it. That was unusual, though not unprecedented. There were moments when information reached him directly, slipping past the systems built to protect his time. This one stayed because he let it. He arrived at the office later than planned. Not late enough to draw attention, but late enough to compress the morning. Meetings shifted by minutes. An assistant adjusted a schedule without asking why. No one mentioned the delay. He moved through the building with the same economy as always, the same pace, the same nods. Doors opened before he reached them. Coffee appeared at his elbow without comment. He accepted it, though he didn't drink it right away. From the outside, nothing had changed. In the conference room, he listened while others spoke. He took notes he wouldn't need to reference. Numbers moved across screens. Decisions were framed, discussed, and deferred. When it came time for him to speak, he did. Briefly, precisely. The room responded. Between agenda items, his phone vibrated once against the table. He didn't look at it. He knew what it was. Power, for him, had always been quiet. It lived in the absence of friction, in how rarely he had to repeat himself, in how problems arrived already shaped for resolution. He had spent years building that distance. It kept things efficient, clean. The message cut across it. When the meeting ended, he stayed seated while others stood. He waited until the room cleared before checking his phone. No new messages, just the same thread, unchanged since the delivery confirmation he hadn't replied to. He slipped the phone into his pocket and stood. The chair made a soft sound as he pushed it in. Back in his office, the view was the same as always. City stretching outward. Motion without intimacy. He set his coffee down untouched and picked up the legal pad. The pen hovered for a moment before he wrote a single word in the margin. Formula. He underlined it once. Not for emphasis, just to mark it as real. Later, an assistant knocked and entered without waiting for a response. She carried a tablet and a folder. Her tone was neutral, practiced. "There's a question from legal," she said, "about the delivery." He looked up. "What kind of question?" She hesitated just enough to register. "They noticed the expense. It's minor, but out of pattern. They want to confirm it wasn't personal." He considered the phrasing. Out of pattern. Personal. "It was intentional," he said. "No follow-up needed." She nodded, already adjusting. Understood. When she left, the room felt smaller than before. Not claustrophobic, just less abstract. He sat back and folded his hands, resting them against his stomach. The silence pressed in. He thought about how easily the delivery had happened. A call, a card, a name that opened doors. Logistics bent without resistance. The ease unsettled him more than the request had. Across town, the father rinsed a bottle and set it on the drying rack. He moved with less urgency now, though the routine was the same. He checked the bag again, even though he knew what was inside. He stacked the cans neatly in the cabinet, labels facing forward. The baby watched from the high chair, banging one hand against the tray. The sound was sharp but contained. He smiled without realizing it, then caught himself and looked away. At the office, another message came through. This one from security. A brief note. No concern, just protocol. Be aware, recipient location logged. No further action taken. He read it once and deleted it. The knowledge lingered anyway. A place now attached to a person. A person now attached to a choice. He stood and crossed the room, stopping at the window again. Down below, people moved in patterns he didn't follow, lives intersecting without notice. He had always preferred it that way. The phone vibrated again. Not a text this time. An alert from a news app. He dismissed it without reading. For the rest of the day, the message stayed with him. Not as guilt, not as satisfaction, as something unfinished, a thread left open. In the apartment, evening settled. The father fed the baby again, this time without counting. He let the bottle empty at its own pace. When it was done, he lifted the child and rested him against his shoulder, patting gently. The baby's head fit just under his chin. The weight was familiar. Grounding. He thought about the man who had sent the formula. Not who he was, but what he had done. The simplicity of it. No lecture, no expectation. He didn't send another message. Gratitude felt already spent. At the office, the building emptied floor by floor. Lights dimmed in sequence. He gathered his things and paused at the desk, looking at the phone one last time before slipping it into his pocket. Distance had always protected him. Now it felt thinner, not gone, just altered. He turned off the light and left the room as he always did. The door closed behind him with a soft, final sound. The second message arrived the next morning, earlier than expected. It wasn't a thank you. It wasn't even a message, really. Just a photo. 2 cans on a kitchen counter, the edge of a sink visible in the corner. Light coming in from a window out of frame. No faces, no names. He studied it longer than he should have. Not for information, but for confirmation. The image carried proof without asking for anything in return. That made it harder to ignore. He didn't respond right away. He set the phone down and finished getting dressed. The routine held. Shirt pressed. Shoes aligned. He checked his watch before leaving, not because he was late, but because that was what he did. In the apartment, the father cleaned the counter after sending the photo. He wiped the same spot twice, then folded the paper bag and tucked it into the recycling bin. He moved through the morning with a steadiness that hadn't been there the day before. The baby sat on the floor, chewing on a plastic ring. He made a soft sound, more curious than hungry. The father watched him for a moment before turning back to the sink. The phone buzzed again while he was rinsing his hands. Glad it arrived. That was all. He let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. He typed a reply, then erased it. He typed a reply, then erased it. He typed again. It did. Thank you. He set the phone down and didn't pick it up again. At the office, the day fractured into smaller pieces. Conversations overlapped. A meeting ran long. An assistant slipped him a note he read and folded without comment. The photo stayed in his mind, static and unremarkable, which made it persistent. By midday, questions began to surface. Not accusations, just checks. A compliance officer asked if there was any ongoing contact. A communications lead mentioned the risk of misinterpretation if the interaction expanded. Each question was framed as caution, not concern. There's no follow-up, he said. It's done. They nodded. Notes were taken. The matter should have closed there. But later, another message came through. This one had words. I won't reach out again. Just wanted to say, the baby slept through his nap today. That doesn't usually happen. He read the sentence twice. Then once more, slower. The detail was small, ordinary. That was what unsettled him. It wasn't gratitude. It was information, shared without agenda. He didn't respond. In the apartment, the father set the phone face down after sending the message. He hadn't planned to send it. The thought had arrived unannounced, then pressed until he acted. Now that it was done, he felt exposed. He busied himself with chores that didn't need doing. He swept the floor. He reorganized the cabinet where the formula sat. He checked the lock on the door. then checked it again. The baby slept in the other room, chest rising and falling in a slow rhythm. The father stood in the doorway longer than necessary, listening. At the office, the message stayed unread longer than it should have. He saw the notification but left it there. He attended another meeting. He signed a document. He nodded at someone whose name he knew but couldn't recall. When he finally opened the message, it was late. The building was nearly empty. He sat alone at the desk, the light from the screen reflecting off the glass behind it. He typed a response and deleted it. Typed another. Deleted that too. There was no rule against replying, no formal policy, just an understanding of boundaries. Lines that once crossed were difficult to redraw. He sent nothing. The next day, a package arrived at the apartment. Not formula. Diapers, a size larger than the baby currently wore. The brand was mid-range. Practical. There was no note. The father stared at the box on the kitchen floor. He hadn't asked for this. He hadn't hinted. The gesture felt heavier than the first. Less necessary. More intentional. He lifted the box and set it in the corner, unopened. He stood there, hands on his hips, weighing something he couldn't name. At the office, legal sent another message, this one firmer. We recommend discontinuing personal deliveries. He replied with a single word, agreed. He believed it when he sent it. That evening, the father opened the box and stacked the diapers neatly. He kept one aside, running his thumb along the edge before setting it down. The baby watched from the high chair, kicking his feet. Easy, the father said quietly. Not to the child. To the moment. The line between help and intrusion had shifted. Neither man had named it, but both felt it. The quiet was no longer empty. It was waiting. The change did not announce itself. It arrived the way dust does. Slow, settling into corners no one checked every day. The father noticed it first in small interruptions. A neighbor paused too long in the hallway, eyes dropping to the box by the door before lifting again. The woman downstairs asked if everything was okay, her voice casual but her timing off. Someone at the grocery store commented on the baby's shoes, then lingered as if waiting for more. Nothing overt, nothing kind or unkind enough to react to. Just attention. He adjusted by closing the door faster, by carrying things inside in fewer trips, by keeping the curtains drawn an inch more than usual. The apartment felt the same size, but the air moved differently. The baby didn't notice. He woke, ate, slept. He learned how to grip the edge of the table with both hands and rock forward until his balance failed. Each fall ended the same way, with surprise, then laughter. The father stayed close, hands ready but not hovering. He found himself watching more carefully. Not just the baby. Everything else. At night, he replayed conversations he hadn't had, replies he hadn't sent. He wondered what the other man expected, if anything. The absence of expectation was the most difficult part. It left too much room. Across the city, the other man's days filled with resistance he wasn't used to. Not opposition, hesitation. People asked questions they hadn't before. Assistants clarified decisions twice instead of once. The delivery approval stalled in a system that usually moved on instinct. He noticed the shift in meetings. How often the word context appeared, how frequently someone referenced perception. It's not an issue, he said more than once. Each time the reassurance felt thinner. At lunch, he ate alone at his desk, something he hadn't done in years. He scrolled through emails he didn't need to answer. The message thread stayed archived, untouched. He did not open it. He did not delete it either. The tension followed him home. That evening, he stood in his kitchen, hands resting on the counter. Lights dimmed lower than usual. The room was too large for the quiet in it. He thought about the photo again. The angle of the counter, the ordinary light. He poured a glass of water and left it untouched. In the apartment, the father sat on the floor, sorting laundry. He folded each small shirt with care, lining them up by size. The diapers stayed in the corner, unopened since the first stack. He told himself it was practical, that he didn't want to rely on what he couldn't predict. The baby crawled toward the pile and grabbed a sock, pulling it into his mouth. The father took it gently and replaced it with a plastic cup. The baby accepted the trade without protest. Later, the father's phone buzzed. A message from a number he didn't recognize. "Hey, heard you might have extra baby stuff?" My cousin mentioned. He stared at the screen. His thumb hovered. The message wasn't aggressive. It wasn't even clear how the sender knew. That was the problem. He didn't reply. He blocked the number and set the phone down. His hand shook slightly as he did it. The next morning, a meeting was added to the other man's calendar. No explanation. Just the title, Boundary Review. He arrived on time. The room was smaller than most he used. Fewer people. Legal. Communications. Security. They spoke carefully. Not about morality, about precedent. About exposure. About how one quiet decision could widen without intention. "You didn't do anything wrong," someone said. "But it can't continue." He nodded. He had already come to that conclusion on his own. Hearing it spoken aloud didn't bring relief. It brought finality. In the apartment, the father packed the diaper bag for a walk. He hesitated, then added one of the new diapers, folding it flat and placing it at the bottom. The baby watched him, eyes tracking each movement. Outside, the air was cool. The street was louder than usual. The car slowed as it passed him, then moved on. He adjusted the strap on the stroller and kept walking. Back in the conference room, the meeting ended without disagreement. Steps were outlined. Contact would cease. Deliveries would stop. Any further communication would go through proper channels, if at all. He agreed to everything. When he stood to leave, he felt something loosen in his chest. Not peace, just the release that comes after a decision is locked. That evening, the father returned home and found nothing waiting at the door. No bag, no box, just a familiar scuff on the carpet near the frame. He stood there for a moment, keys still in hand. Inside, the baby fussed, then settled when lifted. The father held him longer than necessary, resting his cheek against the child's head. On opposite sides of the city, both men moved through rooms that had not changed, but the quiet between them had gained weight. The first thing the father noticed was how quickly the apartment returned to normal. No packages, no unfamiliar numbers lighting up his phone. The hallway conversations shortened again. People stopped lingering. Attention moved on to something else, as it always did. Relief should have followed. It didn't. What settled instead was a low, constant awareness, like the feeling after a near miss. Nothing had happened, but something had almost happened, and the body remembered. He adjusted his routine without thinking about it. Walks happened earlier in the morning. Grocery trips were shorter. He paid cash when he could. The diapers from the box were used sparingly, rotated in with the ones he bought himself, as if balance could be maintained by pattern alone. The baby grew heavier in his arms. Supply, week by week. Holding him required more effort now. The father felt it in his wrists, his lower back. He welcomed the strain. It made things concrete. One afternoon, while the baby sat in the high chair smearing mashed fruit across the tray, the father caught himself staring at the cabinet where the formula was kept. The labels were still aligned. He hadn't meant to keep them that way. It had just happened. He reached up and turned one can sideways. The baby banged the tray with both hands, startled by the sudden movement. The father looked down. "Sorry," he said. "Just the word, nothing else." The baby studied him, then smiled. A wide, uncomplicated thing. He dropped the spoon and watched it fall. Later, the phone buzzed. A notification from his bank. The deposit from his paycheck had gone through. He did the math without sitting down. There would be enough this time. Barely. Enough counted. He didn't think about texting anyone. Across the city, the other man's days returned to their previous shape, but the fit was imperfect. Schedules resumed. Meetings flowed. The word boundary disappeared from conversation. Still, something dragged. He found himself pausing before decisions that once moved automatically. Not because of doubt, but because of awareness. He noticed the mechanics now. How many people it took to make something simple happen. How insulated the process was. One evening, he stopped by a grocery store on his way home. He hadn't planned to. He stood in the aisle longer than necessary, staring at shelves lined with formula. Different brands, different prices. None of it scarce here. He picked up a can, then put it back. Picked up another. Read the label without absorbing it. Around him, other shoppers moved with mild impatience. He left the store without buying anything. At home, he poured a drink and didn't finish it. He sat at the table with the glass untouched, phone face down beside it. The archived message thread stayed where it was. A closed door he did not open. He wondered briefly what the man and the baby were doing at that exact moment. Not where, not how they were, just what the room sounded like. The thought passed. In the apartment, the father sat on the floor while the baby practiced standing, gripping the edge of the couch. Each attempt ended the same way, with a slow collapse and a look of confusion. The father laughed once, quietly, then caught himself and stayed still. The baby looked up at him. Again, the father said, before thinking. The baby didn't respond with words. He tried again anyway. That night, as the father rocked him to sleep, the baby rested his head against the father's shoulder and said, clearly and without effort, "Stay." It wasn't a request, just a sound, a simple arrangement of letters he had learned that week. The father froze, not in fear, in recognition. He tightened his hold slightly and stayed exactly where he was until the baby's breathing evened out. Across the city, the other man stood at his window again. Lights low, city spread out beneath him. He didn't know why the evening felt heavier than others. He only knew he did not turn on the television. Two lives, no longer touching, carried the weight of the same moment. Neither one named it. The decision did not arrive all at once. It came in fragments, scattered across ordinary moments. For the father, it surfaced while standing in line at the pharmacy. The baby rested against his chest in a front carrier, weight pulling his shoulders forward. The clerk asked if he wanted to sign up for a rewards program. He shook his head without explanation. When it was his turn to pay, he slid his card across the counter and waited for the machine to respond. Approved. He felt it in his chest before his face showed anything. Not relief, just confirmation. On the walk home, he passed a donation bin outside a community center. The lid was half open. A cardboard sign taped to the side read, "Baby items welcome." He slowed, stopped, adjusted the carrier strap. At home, he opened the cabinet and took out the remaining unopened can. He held it for a moment, then placed it back. Instead, he crossed the room to the corner and lifted the box of diapers. He opened it and removed half the stack, folding them neatly into a reusable bag. The baby watched from the floor, chewing on the same plastic ring. "We're okay," the father said quietly. Not as reassurance, as a statement. At the center, he left the bag by the bin without speaking to anyone. He didn't wait to see who would take it. He walked away with his hands empty. That night, he slept without checking the door. Across the city, the other man faced his own version of the choice. It arrived during a board review, buried in a line item. A proposal to expand a private initiative. Quiet, controlled, generous. The kind of thing that would never make headlines unless someone wanted it to. The room waited for his response. He read the summary once, then again. He saw how easily his name could become attached, how quickly intention could be mistaken for image. The mechanisms were already in place. All that was needed was approval. He closed the folder. "Not this," he said. "Redirect the funds." There was no objection, just notes taken, adjustments made. After the meeting, an assistant followed him out. "Are you sure?" she asked, careful to keep her tone neutral. "Yes," he said. "It needs to be separate." "Separate how?" He paused, long enough to feel the shape of the answer settle. "Anonymous," he said. "And indirect." She nodded. "I'll see to it." That evening, he walked home instead of taking the car. The city moved around him at a human pace. He passed a park where a man sat on a bench, feeding a baby from a bottle. He did not slow. He did not look twice. At home, he cleared his desk. Not reorganized, cleared. Papers filed. Objects returned to drawers. He powered down his computer and left it that way. He took out his phone and opened the archived message thread. The photo loaded slowly, then fully. He looked at it one last time. Then he deleted the conversation. The action was final. No recovery, no record. In the apartment, the father folded laundry again. The pile was smaller than before. He noticed it and adjusted his folding to make it last longer. When he finished, he placed the clothes in the drawer and closed it carefully. The baby crawled toward him and pulled himself up using the edge of the couch. He wobbled, steadied, then stood for half a second on his own. The father watched without moving. The baby fell, surprised but unharmed. He looked up, searching. The father met his eyes and nodded once. "That's it," he said. The night settled. Street noise softened. The apartment returned to its usual quiet. No expectation hung in the air. No waiting. Across the city, lights dimmed in a high-rise. One window remained lit longer than the others, then finally went dark. Both men had chosen something that would not announce itself, something that would not be praised or corrected. The cost was paid in advance, in silence. Morning arrived without interruption. The father woke before the baby, the room still gray, the street quiet. He lay still for a moment, listening. The baby's breathing came slow and even from the crib beside the bed. No urgency. No countdown. He stood, careful not to wake him, and went to the kitchen. The cabinet opened without thought. He reached for the formula and noticed the gap where one can had been turned sideways weeks earlier. The labels were no longer aligned. He left them that way. He prepared the bottle and set it on the counter, then paused. He waited. The baby would wake soon enough. When the cry came, it was brief. More announcement than need. The father lifted him from the crib and held him against his chest, feeling the familiar weight settle in. The baby rested his head there, just for a second, before pulling back to look around. The bottle emptied at its usual pace. No counting. No measuring beyond habit. Later they walked, the same route as before. Past the corner store. Past the bus stop. Past the community center with the donation bin now closed. A new sign taped over the old one. The father didn't slow this time. He pushed the stroller with one hand, the other resting at his side. The baby pointed at nothing in particular. The father followed the gesture anyway. In the afternoon, he filled out paperwork at the table. Forms he'd been putting off, assistants he hadn't wanted to think about. He wrote carefully, staying inside the lines. When he finished, he stacked the pages and set them by the door. They stayed there. Across the city, the other man woke to a calendar with fewer entries than usual. Not empty, just lighter. He dressed without checking his phone first. He ate breakfast standing at the counter, the radio off. He left the apartment on foot again. The city was louder at this hour, less forgiving. He moved through it without protection. At work, a new system had taken effect. Funds moved through intermediaries. Decisions passed through layers that removed names. He reviewed reports that no longer carried his imprint. The work continued. The distance returned, altered but intact. At lunch, he sat in a public park. No table, just a bench. He watched people pass without tracking them. A man struggled with a stroller wheel. Someone else stopped to help. They fixed it together and moved on without speaking. He stayed seated. In the apartment, the father bathed the baby in the evening, water sloshing against the sides of the tub. The baby kicked, splashing his shirt. The father laughed once, openly this time, then reached for a towel. As he lifted the baby out, the child wrapped one arm around his neck, clumsy but firm. The father held him there, dripping water onto the floor unconcerned. "Okay," he said. The word felt complete. After the baby slept, the father cleared the table. The paperwork remained by the door. He looked at it, then turned off the light without picking it up. It could wait until morning. Across the city, the other man returned home and noticed the silence immediately. Not the absence of sound, but the absence of interruption. No alerts, no messages waiting. He set his phone on the counter and did not check it again. He stood at the window once more. The city looked the same as it always had. Lights, movement, distance. He did not think about the message. Not directly. He turned off the light and went to bed. In the apartment, the baby shifted in his sleep, murmuring something unintelligible. The father adjusted the blanket and sat on the edge of the bed for a moment longer than necessary. Nothing was coming. Nothing was expected. The world had not changed loudly. It had only adjusted through what was no longer waiting to arrive.